Scott, we were talking as the war began. I think you're the first person I spoke to. Same thing happened in the 12-day war. As soon as the missiles were falling, were being launched by Iran, we were doing a live stream. Can you compare where we are today to where we were when we first spoke on day one, and maybe give us a breakdown of what you think Iran's strategy is?
Well, on day one, we were doing a lot of theoreticals because it was unfolding as we spoke. So, we were, at least, I as an analyst was projecting. Today, we have a lot more data points. And I think that much of what we talked about on our first conversation holds true to this day. I will continue to state firmly that the United States and Israel lost this war with the first 6 missiles they fired into Iran, because the first 6 missiles struck the home of Ali Khamenei. The purpose was decapitation, designed to precipitate popular uprising in Iran to bring down the Islamic Republic. There were popular uprisings in the streets, but not against the Islamic Republic, but firmly in support of this. They created a martyr in a faithful, among people of faith who revere martyrs. Ali Khamenei today, regardless of what you think about him, what I think about him, doesn't matter what the Iranian people inside Iran think about him. They worship this man. They revere this man. And now we've turned him into an immortal hero. And so any concept of regime change or toppling the regime or collapsing the regime is out the window, which means this campaign has failed from the start. Because in order to bring Iran to its knees, you're going to have to kill 90 million people. And we don't have the wherewithal to do that. Moreover, as I pointed out in our discussion, the Iranians have a plan. And that plan is more than simply punishing Israel. And by the way, Israel is being pummeled. I mean, what's happening in Israel is mind-boggling, and it's only going to get worse. But they had a plan to eradicate the American military footprint in the Middle East, and that is happening. The bases that the United States operated on are one by one being dismantled. Not just the bases, though, where Iran is targeting the diplomatic footprint of the United States, striking embassies, making it clear that the United States is not welcome in the region, and that for this conflict to end, it's not the Iranian government that will topple, but the American presence in the Middle East that must be evicted. And that's the case that the Iranians are making right now. And they're doing that also by punishing the Arab nations that promoted an American presence in the Middle East. They're targeting the United Arab Emirates. They're targeting Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. These are punishing blows. And now they've taken it to the next level, something that they've never, ever done before. They've shut the Strait of Hormuz, and they're starting to target energy production facilities. And they've put the Saudis and the Emiratis and others on notice that it's not just your production fields, and it's not just blocking the Strait of Hormuz. They're now going to target the pipelines. There will be no energy flowing out of this region, and this will destroy the global economy and put political pressure on the United States and Israel to bring this conflict to an end.
Couldn't this backfire on Iran as well? There's talks now about Saudi joining the war. So if you have Gulf nations turning on Iran and militarily starting to get involved, you've got France sending an aircraft carrier to the region, you've got the UK sending fighter jets to Cyprus. So couldn't Iran's strategy, which I think is, from a strategic perspective, it makes sense, pressuring the Gulf countries to then pressure Trump, choking off the energy, but couldn't that also backfire if these countries that were not initially involved in the war become directly involved?
They were always involved in the war, Mario. To pretend that Saudi Arabia was not involved is to ignore the fact that the Saudi government was encouraging Donald Trump to carry out this action. And they were saying, if you're going to do this, kill the regime. Saudi bases have been used to provide a haven for Americans, etc. And what are the Saudis going to do? With all due respect to the Saudis, they couldn't beat the Houthi. Since 2014, the vaunted Saudi military is being beaten the crap out of by the Houthi. And so what, now they're going to frighten Iran by saying what? They're going to send their aircraft in to bomb places? Is Saudi intelligence that much better than American intelligence and Israeli intelligence? Do they hold the magic key to breaking the will of the Iranian people? No, this is a pathetic gesture that'll backfire on the Saudis, because Saudi Arabia may be able to send a couple F-15 in to drop bombs on targets they know nothing about. Iran will destroy Saudi Arabia. So, yeah, bring it on, Saudi Arabia. I mean, don't be stupid. This is just a face-saving gesture on the part of a Saudi regime that recognizes they're on the wrong side of history. They made a fatal mistake in believing that the United States could provide a security shield against Iran, especially when the United States is working hand in glove with Israel. Marco Rubio has all but admitted Israel caused this war. This is a war about Israel, for Israel. And now Saudi Arabia is going to jump in on this? Do you understand what that does to the legitimacy of the Saudi government in the eyes of the Saudi people? If you want to foment popular uprising to remove the Saud family from power, side with Israel openly. And that's what they're doing. So no, this will not backfire on Iran. This actually plays into Iran's hands.
The issue, though, is that no one is siding with Iran. China just said they're not helping Iran militarily. There's been talks about China sharing intelligence with Iran, which I still think is the case. Russia is not in a place to be able to send weaponry to Iran right now. So Iran is, militarily speaking, they're doing a pretty good job. They're fighting a multi-front war. They're striking Gulf nations, striking Israel, striking American bases, struck Cyprus as well. They're targeting the carrier strike groups as well. But there's no one supporting them. And if anything, the sentiment in those countries is turning against Iran because they're getting dragged into it.
That's just not true.
How long can Iran sustain this?
That's not true. That's not true. First of all, Iran isn't looking for nations to support it. Iran is a cause today, an anti-American, anti-imperialist, anti-American hegemony cause. And ask the people that are in the streets of Bahrain right now, rising up against the Khalifa family, what side they're on. Ask the Shia today that are simmering in the eastern provinces of Saudi Arabia, what side they're on. Ask the people in the street of almost every Gulf Arab nation what side they're on. They're not on the side of Israel. They're not on the side of Israel.
You've got Pakistan, you've got Iraq as well, Scott. People rose up and attacked the embassies.
Iran doesn't need governments that have long since been corrupted by the United States and Israel. I mean, any signatory to the Abrams Accord is a fundamentally corrupt government in the eyes of the Islamic world. Why would you side with Greater Israel? But many governments have. The Iranians don't need those governments, and they don't need weapons. Russia and China were never going to provide weapons once the balloon went up. Iran was always going to be responsible for its own self-defense, for its own military activities. And Iran has been preparing for more than 25 years. And look at how that preparation's paid off. All right. They know what they're doing. Donald Trump is in the middle of revising his plan because it didn't work. Iran's not revising its plan. Iran is just going forward. So I from the perspective of who's on top here right now, it's the Iranian plan that seems to be working. They don't need Russia to fly in support. They don't need China to fly in support. They're beating the United States. They're beating Israel, and they're beating the Gulf Arab states.
There's a report here about America. We've talked about the munitions, the stockpiles running low, and they've been running low for a long time for the U.S. So there's a report here. America's considering pulling THAAD and Patriot batteries from South Korea to send to the Middle East. The systems protecting Seoul from North Korean missiles potentially redeployed to intercept Iranian ones. And talks about how the 12-day war burnt through a lot of THAAD missiles. How significant is the stockpile issue? Trump did put out a post. You'd expect that every country would say the same thing. He put out a post saying we've got enough stockpiles across the world to continue this for as long as needed. But how significant are news like the report I just mentioned?
Well, first of all, the Trump post said we have enough ammunition, but he also conceded we don't have enough top-tier ammunition. And then he started blaming Joe Biden for this problem, saying that he gave it all away to Zelensky. So the weapons that are going to win this war are the top-tier weapons, especially from a defensive standpoint. Because the second we lose the ability to even have a cursory chance at preempting or interdicting Iranian missiles, it's over. Because then they'll just blow everything up and there's nothing anybody can do to stop it. And so, the warning of the generals and admirals is coming home to roost. They said, Mr. President, we have insufficient resources to complete this mission. And now the president is confronted with that on day three. And what's the result? They're going to strip away the defenses of South Korea and Japan. Now imagine if you're South Korea and Japan and you've just spent the last several years working in the United States to create this tripartite alliance that threatens North Korea with nuclear war. I mean, the United States is building a joint nuclear war planning capability with South Korea and Japan involved. And now, so they're sitting here saying, okay, we're going to sign up for this, but that's because we have the backing of the United States. The full force of the United States is behind us, but not anymore, because the United States just decided that they're going to strip away the very defenses that are supposed to protect South Korea and Japan from North Korean missiles, strip them away and send them to the Middle East because President Trump, Pete Hegseth, and Marco Rubio didn't plan this properly. What signals is it? Remember, read the National Security Strategy document that was promulgated by the Trump administration in November. They speak of that their goal is to have military overmatch with China in the South Chinese Sea. How can you have military overmatch if you're stripping all your weapons away and sending them to the Middle East? We're conceding feet in the Pacific. And what happens if China decides at this point in time, based upon American behavior, that they can't trust the United States? I mean, Trump and President Xi are supposed to be meeting and they're supposed to be talking, but I mean, what is the track record here? Twice now, the United States has negotiated in bad faith with Iran, carrying out acts of perfidy, which is a war crime, just so people understand, to wave the white flag, have a truce, and then carry out surprise attacks using the truce as cover. Perfidy, a war crime, in addition to the illegal war of aggression that is taking place as well. But how could you ever trust the United States? Iran can't. They won't negotiate ever again with the United States because you can't trust us. We don't negotiate in good faith. But now you're the Russians looking at Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the same people who betrayed, Iran this time around. You have to totally reevaluate what Trump is doing. And again, there's a track record here. Donald Trump was in a phone conversation with Vladimir Putin on December 28th, when 91 Ukrainian drones, guided by CIA intelligence, tried to kill President Putin while he was on the phone with President Trump. So now you're President Xi saying, gosh, he wants to enter into a series of negotiations. Do you understand now, China, that the United States doesn't negotiate in good faith, that whatever the United States does with negotiations is simply to buy time, to weaken you, to lull you into a false sense of complacency while we do something behind your back militarily? So this is spiraling out of control for the United States. There will be ramifications globally for the duplicity and the incompetence of the Trump regime.
So considering those circumstances, what do you expect Trump to do next? There's talks about this war lasting weeks, but if you take into consideration the depletion of the stockpiles, the Gulf nations, the Gulf nations are, I'm trying to really understand whether they're benefiting more or losing more, because their oil facilities are being struck, and the image they've created of being stable hubs for the wealthy around the world, to get stability, to get prosperity, that's being shaken because of the strikes. But at the same time, their main rival, the Saudis' biggest rival, UAE's biggest rival, is getting significantly weakened by Israel and the US. So are the Gulf nations in a position where they are benefiting from this, and they benefit more from this war ongoing? And when it comes to Trump, is he going to be looking for an exit ramp, or he's stuck in a prolonged war at the moment?
Well, first of all, why do you think Iran is losing? Because bombs are blowing up? Because you see giant dust clouds? They're blowing up empty buildings. You do know that, right? You do know there's nothing in the buildings that are being struck. All of these buildings are legacy buildings that are linked to organizations that have been marked for destruction. But these organizations have left those buildings and are in other locations that are not being struck. So, I just want to remind people that
on this empty building, sorry, Scott, but on this empty buildings, like if you look at the intelligence capabilities of Israel and the US, they've been able to hack into the traffic cameras, be able to monitor Khamenei according to reports since 2001 before striking him on day one of the operation. There's been talks about Khamenei being killed in the third week or fourth week of the operation. According to Trump, they killed him on day one. So I'd be surprised if Mossad and the CIA were not able to locate the right buildings to strike. And number two as well, that Israel made the claim, and obviously I don't believe the claim, but they made the claim that there's only 12 missile launchers left in Iran that they haven't struck yet, and Iran is running out of launchers as well.
Well, we'll find out. I remember, you forget maybe who you're talking to, a guy who has planned an operation, an intelligence officer who has worked with Israel and the CIA on an intimate level, in war and in other than war. I know these people very, very well. I was doing battle damage assessment during Desert Storm when we were trying to track down and kill Iraqi Scud launchers. And I remember that we had assessed that there were 19 mobile launchers in the Iraqi inventory before the war. And we were pretty much right. By the end of week 1, we had killed 64 of those launchers. Now, Mario, you're smart enough to know that that doesn't work, does it? If you have 19 and you've killed 64, then why are the Iraqis still firing missiles into Saudi Arabia and Israel? It means that the battle damage assessment is wrong. I've also worked with the Israelis, and I understand that they exaggerate greatly, just like everybody else. So, if Israel believes they only have a handful, 12 launchers left, so be it. Then congratulations, Israel, you just won the war. But the last time I checked, more than 12 missiles were launched at once against Israel. So right off the bat, their logic is fundamentally flawed. And remember, while they're launching against Israel, they're also launching against the Gulf Arab states and American military. Count the missiles flying and tell me there's only 12 left in terms of launchers. The Israelis are just blowing smoke. This is what they do, propagandists, just like the United States does, just like Iraq does, or Iran does. Iran is out there talking about, sinking the carrier and doing this and killing 500 people. That didn't happen. Yeah. This is what nations do. They exaggerate their capabilities as part of bolstering.
Do you think Iran can strike a carrier or even sink a carrier? Do they have the capacity based on what you're seeing right now? Or the defenses are just too extensive? The different layered defenses cannot be penetrated by Iran?
Hopefully we'll never find out. Iran has tested it. You don't sink the carrier until you sink the carrier. We know they've launched an attack against the carrier, and so far the carrier's defenses have worked. The defenses work until they don't work. So we'll see.
How about their sea drones? Do the carriers have the capacity technologically to intercept sea drones as well?
Yes. The United States is not an incompetent military, and we have been preparing for war for some time. Aircraft carrier is one of the most expensive assets we have, and we've spent a lot of money to protect it. And so,
if you look at Russia's fleet in the Black Sea and how the Ukrainian success in targeting that fleet, that's why I think that Iranian sea drones is probably their best bet in terms of causing damage for the U.S. based on what Ukraine did to Russia.
Yeah, the Black Sea is sort of a closed environment. The Abraham Lincoln's sort of in the open sea. I think it's you're comparing apples and oranges here. So I don't see
and American capabilities are you might disagree, but technologically speaking, more capable than the Russian naval fleet.
I don't know. The Russians still launch caliber missiles from their ships that strike Ukraine on a near daily basis. So the idea that the Russian fleet has been somehow neutralized is absurd in the extreme. Russia is going up against a NATO-equipped, NATO-style force, and Russia has suffered casualties, as one would expect. But the idea that Ukraine owns the Black Sea is mooted by the fact that the Russians still launch caliber missiles from their ships in the Black Sea that are devastating Ukraine's energy infrastructure, missile defense systems, etc. So again, I think we're just comparing apples and oranges here. We're talking about strikes carried out by Ukraine in a very well-defined battle space, and we're talking about Iran trying to strike a carrier battle group in the open sea. Two different scenarios.
And going back to the original question of Trump and the Gulf nations, long term, can the Gulf nations sustain this with the strikes on the oil and gas infrastructure? They've intercepted over 90% of the missiles and drones.
No.
And Trump, okay, the Gulf nations cannot. So then you'd expect the Gulf nations to either join the war or pressure Trump to end it. Which one do you think would be?
And I think in the end, they're going to pressure Trump to end it, because what can the Gulf nations bring to the forefront? It's just a standard question. I don't mean to be insulting to these people, but they have nothing. Again, Saudi Arabia couldn't defeat Ansarallah since 2014. Couldn't defeat Ansarallah. And so now the vaunted Saudi Arabian Air Force is suddenly going to be the straw that breaks the Iranian camel's back. The United Arab Emirates has also been involved in taking on Nasrallah unsuccessfully, couldn't win, had to withdraw. And now suddenly the UAE is going to be that factor which puts America and Israel over the top. These nations have no real capacity against a real enemy. Whatever they do to Iran will be paid back tenfold. In Iran has a plan. Ask me what the Saudi Arabian war plan against Iran is right now. They don't have one. They are working with the United States to find out if there's a way they can make a face-saving gesture, sort of a token strike to say we did something. But if they do that, Iran will simply up it up because Iran has a plan. Iran has resources allocated to the punishment of Saudi Arabia. And I think people need to understand that the Iranians probably have regime change components in these plans. I know they have one in Bahrain. I would be surprised if the Khalifa family survives this crisis. Right now, we have Saudi Arabian and Gulf states, emergency forces in Bahrain trying to stabilize the situation. You may not be able to stabilize that. And if Bahrain falls, Eastern Saudi Arabia comes at risk. And when Saudi Arabia starts diverting resources to deal with Eastern Saudi Arabia, ask the Saudis how they feel about Nasrallah's ability to threaten the southern territories of Saudi Arabia. Because if Saudi Arabia strips away their defenses down there to deal with an uprising in the eastern provinces, Nasrallah will take over the southern provinces, which used to be part of Yemen. So, Saudi Arabia is at real risk here. There's no strength on the side of the Saudis right now. Their economy will collapse, and they are completely dependent upon their ability to bring energy to market. And when you deny them that ability, and then you combine it with Nasrallah and the Iranians carrying out what it is, in effect, a regime change operation, the Al Saud family may not be long for power as well. And I would say that every ruling family in the Middle East is at risk here because all of their legitimacy comes from the facade they had created of wealth, of prosperity, and security. And the Iranian plan right now is stripping away that facade. They're not secure. There's nothing anybody can do to defend them. The United Arab Emirates spent $2 billion buying air defense systems that aren't doing the job, and they're running out of them. And the United States is not running to replace them because the United States has to replace them for Israel. Think about that for a second if you're an Emirati. You're supposed to be the great ally of the United States, but in your moment of need, the United States is ignoring you and giving the systems to Israel. That means Israel is more important to the United States than the Gulf Arab states. And that's a point that Iran has been making over and over again. And then you overlay that, the fact that the wealth that was generated by the production of energy is not going to be generated now because they can't get it to market. Moreover, the infrastructure itself is going to be targeted and destroyed. That's the end of them. So all of the Gulf Arab states now are at risk. And I think this is the reality. I think what you're going to see is when Iran completes the destruction of the American military infrastructure in the Middle East and attacks embassies, forcing America to close embassies, the conditions of conflict termination will be that the United States leaves the Middle East. And Donald Trump is going to have no choice but to embrace this because we lack the capacity. It's laughable to hear Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio and Donald Trump talk about boots on the ground. I was involved in the movement of hundreds of thousands of boots on the ground in Desert Storm. And I'm going to tell you right now, the conditions today aren't even close to what the conditions were back then. First of all, we don't have the troops. We don't have pre-positioned equipment in the stockpiles. We don't have equipment afloat. We're going to have to get everything out of the United States. It takes the United States Army 6 months to prepare a heavy armored brigade for deployment to NATO as part of the security force in Poland and the Balkans. 6 months to prepare. And that means they have to upload, take it down to rail, load it on the ships, and send it out. And that's based upon pre-planned activity, meaning it was known. Now we're talking about taking military resources and sending them to the Middle East. Where's the shipping going to come from? Have we found the shipping? Do we have the shipping? Once we get the shipping, How are we going to protect it? Where are they going to offload? At what port? Because the last time I checked, every port in the region is under threat from Iran. What airfield are we going to land the troops at? Because again, every airfield is under threat. And once they're on the ground, what's going to protect them from Iranian missiles, hammering them while they try to organize for an attack? We're going to have to do an assault into an Iranian city, a port city, Chabahar or Bandar Abbas, and we don't have the capacity to do that. And even if we did, it would take us months, 8-9 months to get ready for something like that. So we simply, this talk of boots on the ground, no, this war is going to be fought with the resources that we currently have, and those resources are insufficient to the task.
Look, I cannot disagree, and I understand the US and Israel is not in a good position. Again, back to the discussion of the stockpiles and also the Gulf nations facing the daily strikes. And now Hezbollah as well entering the war to stretch Israel even thinner. But at the same time, what I'm trying to figure out is how, I know I've asked the question already, but I just don't see how Iran is also capable to sustain this. They're finally the most powerful military in the world. Ukraine would not be able to sustain Russia without NATO support, but there's no NATO supporting Iran. Now, I understand Iran is already, some people would say exceeding expectations. It exceeded mine. No one expected. I think Trump even said he's surprised by Iran's audacity or ability to strike all these Gulf nations. And again, not only military bases, they've struck US military bases and had a few successful strikes. They struck the oil refineries. They've just struck in UAE. They've struck the Fujairah oil pipeline, which is kind of a backup to the Strait of Hormuz. They're closing the Strait of Hormuz. So they're doing extreme damage, and comparing this to the 12-day war is light and day. But the amount of pummeling they're facing beyond the empty buildings, empty or not, beyond the empty buildings, they are facing the most powerful military in the world. And I think I want to say it's an understatement, but I just don't see how Iran could sustain this without more support.
Well, let's use the Ukrainian analogy for a second.
Sorry, Scott, one last thing just came in now. Pakistan's foreign minister has warned Iran of his defensive pact with Saudi. Now, we know about the defensive pact that was signed a few months ago, but I was thinking about it yesterday. And now they've just warned that they might implement that pact. And Pakistan has been very hawkish recently with the attacks on Afghanistan. So I'm not sure if they're going to be dragged into this as well.
Well, I mean, Pakistan has to be careful because the last time I checked, they have a lot of Shia and they have a lot of Islamists, and the pact with Saudi Arabia was supposed to protect it from Israel. It wasn't supposed to reinforce Israel. So this would be actually the end of the Pakistani government. So please, Pakistan, go forth and side with Saudi Arabia on the side of Israel against the one nation that stood up against Israel, and that will be suicide. So this is posturing because they did sign an agreement and they have to say something, but I don't take this seriously.
They do have a pretty significant portion of their population that are Shiite. There's 10 to 15% that are Shiite, which should be taken into consideration. And we know they were attacking the embassy as well, the consulate, the American consulate.
Yeah, so
Khamenei was killed.
It would not go well for the Pakistani. Already, they've had a revolt of the generals. One of their generals has risen up, and there's movement underground. So this would cause Pakistan to collapse from within. And believe it or not, India would really like to see that. So
there's a warning coming out. There's a warning just came in as well in the UAE just now. Due to current situation, a potential missile threat, seek immediate shelter in a closer secure building, and to steer away from windows, doors, and open areas, and wait for further instructions. Obviously, that's where I am. But just to be clear, people in Dubai, there's a lot of Europeans, Americans, Westerners that are not used to wartime. So you've made the point earlier, from a optics perspective, this is not great for the Gulf. But I'll let you continue answering the question. Sorry, Scott. Just on Iran's ability to sustain this.
The Ukrainian model, because you brought up the Ukrainian analogy. Understand this, that Ukraine started the conflict with a very large army that had been trained and prepared by NATO from 2015 on. I mean, every 30 days, I think a battalion's worth of troops were trained by NATO over time. So over 60,000 troops in addition to the hundreds of thousands that Ukraine had. By the middle of the summer, that army had been destroyed by Russia. Now, a lot of people don't talk about that, but the reality is that army had been fundamentally destroyed by Russia, which is why the United States had to pour in a $48 billion new Lend-Lease program, and NATO had to retrain an army heavy with mercenaries from scratch to carry out the counteroffensive in the summer. And so my point is this, that NATO has been pouring resources into Ukraine nonstop to confront Russia, and Russia started the war with insufficient resources as well, coming in with less than 100,000 men against an army that was at that time 600,000 strong. Normally, you want a 3-to-1 ratio, which means Russia should have come in with 1.8 million people. They've never even come close to matching that number. So, Ukraine's a difficult thing, but my point is, Ukraine basically got reduced to zero and had to build from scratch, and they've been playing catch up ever since. Now we come to Iran. In 2005, Dick Cheney threatened to invade Iran. The United States Army was preparing for the invasion of Iran, using Azerbaijan as a base to come down the Caspian Sea and take Tehran. And the Iranians were aware of this. So at that time, the Iranians broke their country up into 12 autonomous military districts. This is 2005, 21 years ago. And since that time, they've been preparing for this very war. For 21 years, Iran has been building missiles, stockpiling missiles, building capability, stockpiling capability, collecting intelligence, building plans, looking at vulnerabilities. 21 years. Iran is executing a war plan that is 21 years in the making. They are ready for this. They've been preparing for this. Nothing's taking them by surprise. The reason why they're doing everything and getting away with it is because they've planned all of this. They've planned all of this. They're ready for any eventuality. They know what the United States is capable of doing. They know what Israel is capable of doing. Remember, Iran is the #1 advisor of Hezbollah. So Iran has been watching the Israeli Air Force in operation now for some time now. And so they're intimately familiar with how the Israeli Air Force operates, the damage that can be done by Israel, and they're intimately familiar with what the United States can do, and the damage that can be done. So now we come back to blowing up empty buildings, because that's all we're doing, is blowing up empty buildings. And as a senior Iraqi told me back in the 1990s, when the United States was in the business of blowing up Iraqi buildings, he said, "You guys are pretty good at blowing up buildings. We're pretty good at pouring concrete. The problem is you guys are bombing empty buildings because we've evacuated everything." And the Iraqis had. They always evacuated these buildings. We never caught the building with anything of value in it. And then the Iraqis would pour concrete and bring the evacuated material back in, and it'd be up and running. So this notion that we, by blowing things up, are retarding Iranian capability is absurd in the extreme. And I just will also leave you this, because we didn't talk about it too much the first time. Ali Khamenei was the one reason why Iran didn't have a nuclear bomb. Ali Khamenei personally, because there is a lot of people, a lot of powerful agencies inside Iran that believe that they should have a nuclear bomb. And Ali Khamenei continued the legacy of the Ayatollah Khomeini and said, no, it's incompatible with Islam. Now, before he died in the fall of 2024, spring of 2025, there were members of his close inner circle who had convinced Ali Khamenei that the fatwa was reversible if certain conditions came up, such as the existential survival of Iran. But even then, Ali Khamenei, as I was told by the president of Iran personally, said, no, we are not going to do this. We are not going to be producing a nuclear bomb. The man who's currently sitting on the 3-person committee that has replaced the supreme leader until they elect a new one is one of the people who said Iran needs a nuclear bomb. Yeah. And as Steve Witkoff has reminded people, the Iranians told Steve Witkoff, we're sitting on 450 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium that can produce up to 11 nuclear bombs. The Iranians told him that, meaning don't screw with us. So guess what, Mario? Iran still may have some trump cards up their own sleeve, because a lot of the intelligence pointed out in 2024, and it was from statements made by senior Revolutionary Guard Command people, that Iran had built a functioning warhead capable of receiving a fissile core, but the core had not been built yet, meaning Iran had a nuclear weapon in every sense of the word, except for the fissile material. And those warheads were outfitted to fit on the newest Iranian missiles. So when Iran evacuated their advanced centrifuges, all they need is 164 centrifuges, a cascade, to be operating one of the hundreds of underground caverns they have to enrich the 60% enriched uranium to 92, 94% enriched uranium. It can be done in a matter of days. Now they have the fissile core. So, I used to say you don't have to worry about this because in the Shia faith, a fatwa is very important and they're not going to override it. But the conditions have been set where a fatwa can be revised if Iran is facing existential threat from nations possessing nuclear weapons. And now they have the head theologian saying, yeah, we should have a nuclear weapon. So this is a very dangerous situation we're in right now. People need to understand that, including you and everybody who resides there, because if, everybody talks about the Samson option, the Israelis taking everything down with them. Now, I don't know if the Iranians will use the term Samson, but what Iran has said about their energy is, before you destroy us, we will destroy the entire region's ability to produce energy. And they're doing that right now. Now, if the United States, confronted with the fact that it can't win this war conventionally, makes a decision that they're going to use low-yield nuclear weapons, which we have an ongoing war plan for. I've talked before about this to all the people out there that say, Scott said the United States would nuke it. The war ain't over yet, guys. And Israel has nuclear weapons. What will Israel do confronted with their existential demise? Now, how does Iran prevent a nuclear attack against its soil? By having 11 nuclear bombs loaded up on missiles, ready to fire against Israel and against the Gulf Arab nations. I'm not saying that's what they're doing. What I'm saying is the one man that prevented that from happening was killed by Israel on day one. And now the man that's sitting as the head theologian, the man who could reverse the fatwa, is a guy who said Iran must have a nuclear weapon. And Iran, as they told Steve Witkoff, still possesses the capacity to produce nuclear weapons. Why we didn't take that deal is beyond me, because the deal that Iran agreed to would have gotten rid of that 60% enriched uranium. So once again, Israel has led the United States and the Gulf Arab states down a path of their own demise. And it's time for the Gulf Arabs to wake up and understand that Iran is not your enemy. Israel is your enemy. Israel will lead to your destruction. And the United States has stopped being your friend. Look at the United Arab Emirates. We're not giving you anti-missile missiles, guys. We're giving them to Israel because we care more about them than we ever cared about you.
Scott, absolute pleasure as always. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you.
Okay.